All right, ready to dive into some Shakespeare?
Always up for that. Where are we headed today?
Well, today it's Henry VIII. We're talking political intrigue, religious turmoil, a little Tudor-era scandal.
Yo, sounds dramatic.
Oh, it is. And you know me, I always like to kick things off with a bang. So picture this. London, 1613, the Globe Theatre, right? Packed house, everyone's buzzing, probably a good bit of ale on the air, you know. When
That
suddenly,
doesn't sound good.
during a performance of Henry VIII, no less, a cannon misfires.
A cannon? What?
You heard that right. They used them for special effects back then.
Wait,
So anyway, it misfires, the thatched roof catches fire, and the whole place goes up in flames.
you're kidding. The whole Globe Theatre burned down because of Henry VIII.
Well, because of a cannon during Henry VIII. Talk about immersive theater, right?
Yeah.
But it just goes to show you, even back then, this play had people on the edge of their seats. But let's back up a bit. For those who might not know the ins and outs, what's the story here? What makes Henry VIII so unique in the Shakespearean universe?
Well, it's different from some of his other history plays. Henry VIII is very focused, very much about a specific period, Henry's break from the Catholic Church and his marriages to Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn.
So we're talking about a king desperate for a male heir, willing to turn England upside down for it.
Exactly. And you've got the religious aspect, the political maneuvering, the rise and fall of Cardinal Wolsey.
It's like a Tudor-era soap opera, but, you know, with really good writing.
And you know what's interesting? They completely avoid showing Anne Boleyn's downfall and execution in the play.
Which, considering they performed this for King James I, who was Anne Boleyn's great-grandnephew, probably a smart move.
Right. Talk about keeping it in the family. But it goes deeper than that, too. It shows the kind of power dynamics Shakespeare was dealing with. Even as a celebrated playwright, there were lines you didn't cross, especially when it came to the royal family.
So we've got intrigue, history, royal drama, but then there's this whole other layer to it, the question of authorship. Now, this is where it gets really interesting.
Oh, absolutely. For centuries, scholars have debated whether Shakespeare actually wrote all of Henry VIII by himself.
So who else might have been involved?
Well, the main contender is John Fletcher.
John Fletcher. Remind me, who was he again?
He was another playwright at the time, very popular, and a lot of scholars believe he collaborated with Shakespeare on Henry VIII.
Okay, so how do you even begin to figure that out? Were there notes scribbled in the margins? Quill fights over character development?
If only. No, it's much more subtle than that. It comes down to linguistic analysis, basically looking at the fingerprints of their writing styles.
Fingerprints, you mean like how they use language?
Exactly. For instance, John Fletcher loved using the word ye instead of you. And when you start looking closely at the text of Henry VIII, those little details, they form patterns.
So you're telling me that you can tell who wrote what just by how often they use ye?
It's a piece of the puzzle. And what's fascinating is that those shifts in language, they often line up with shifts in the play's structure, almost like...
Like two different voices taking turns telling a story.
Exactly. And that's what makes the idea of a collaboration so intriguing. It adds this whole other dimension to how we understand and appreciate the play.
So we've got these two masterminds, Shakespeare and Fletcher, possibly working together, tackling this pivotal moment in English history. But I'm guessing they weren't exactly glued to the history books, right? A little creative license in there.
Well, let's be real. They were writing for an audience.
Yeah.
And a Tudor-era audience at that. Entertainment was just as important as historical accuracy, maybe even more so.
Right, they weren't cranking out textbooks here. This was the hottest ticket in town.
Exactly. But they were also working within certain constraints. You know, the court to think about, the censors. You couldn't just rewrite history altogether.
So how did they strike that balance between the historical facts and the dramatic flair?
Well, they did have a source. They used Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles. That was like the big history bestseller back then. But they definitely weren't afraid to like jazz things up a bit, add their own spin on things.
Ah, the old Tudor twist. I see what you did there.
Yeah.
So give me an example. Where do we see this dramatic license, this historical embellishment most clearly in the play?
Well, the Duke of Buckingham's treason trial is a great example. In Henry VIII, it's presented very ambiguously, like, was he really plotting against the king? Or was he a victim of, say, Cardinal Wolsey's ambition?
Juicy. It's like political intrigue meets, well, intrigue.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so compelling. You're left wondering, was Buckingham really guilty? Or was he framed?
Did Shakespeare and Fletcher take sides?
That's the thing, they don't. They leave it open to interpretation. They use this historical event to explore those bigger themes of power, betrayal, ambition. It's up to the audience to decide what they believe.
Which I imagine would have led to some pretty lively debates back in the day. Can you imagine people arguing about this over their pints at the pub?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the brilliance of it. It's not just passively presenting history. It's inviting the audience to engage with it, to think critically about what they're seeing.
It's amazing how these themes still resonate with us today. I mean, power, ambition, betrayal.
Those are timeless, aren't they?
Totally. And speaking of timeless, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the performance history of Henry VIII.
Oh, yes. From its, shall we say, explosive debut.
Literally explosive.
To the stages of today. It's had quite the journey. We got to talk about John Lowen, too, the actor who first played Henry VIII.
Oh, yeah. Wasn't he supposedly coached by Shakespeare himself?
That's the story. I mean, imagine being a fly on the wall during those rehearsals. Just mind-blowing.
Can you imagine Shakespeare giving you notes on playing Henry VIII?
Talk about pressure. But it just goes to show the impact this play had, even back then.
Absolutely. And it's still going strong today.
Yeah.
Maybe not performed as often as, say, Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet.
But it's got style. And those costumes.
Oh, for sure. You can't beat a good Tudor-era doublet and hose. But as impressive as the spectacle is, I think it's really the ideas at the heart of Henry VIII that keep people coming back. You know, it's funny. We talk about all this political intrigue, the fate of nations. But when you really dig into Henry VIII, it's the human stories that really get to you.
Absolutely. And I think the play really drives home the dangers of unchecked ambition.
Right. That's classic Shakespeare, isn't it? That whole rise and fall, the corrupting influence of power.
And nobody embodies that quite like Cardinal Wolsey. At the beginning, he's got it all power, influence, the king's ear. But by the end...
Well, let's talk about that. How does he go from top dog to, well, not? What's his journey like throughout the play?
So you see him at the height of his power, right? He's Archbishop of York, Lord Chancellor. He's basically running the show.
Calling the shots, pulling the string.
Exactly. But then you've got Henry, desperate for that male heir. And Wolsey, always eager to please the king, throws himself into getting that annulment from Catherine of Aragon.
Which is no easy task. I mean, you've got the Pope, the Holy Roman Emperor. Talk about a tough crowd.
And Wolsey's caught right in the middle of it,
Sure.
trying to appease Henry on one side, the Catholic Church on the other.
Dangerous game. A bit like playing with fire, you might say.
And what does he do? He starts writing secret letters to the Pope, pledging his loyalty, while he's working for Henry behind the scenes.
Oh, that's never a good idea. You can practically hear the dramatic music swelling.
And, of course, those letters get discovered by Henry.
Ouch. Not good for Wolsey. Talk about your Shakespearean downfall.
It really highlights how ambition can be its own worst enemy, you know, the things you're willing to do to climb that ladder.
They often lead to the big tumble back down. And it's not just Wolsey, is it? We see it with other characters, too. Even Henry himself.
Exactly. He might have gotten what he wanted, but at what cost? Shakespeare and Fletcher really make you think about the price of power.
It's a story that never gets old, does it? So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Henry VIII,
Yeah.
what's the big takeaway? What do we learn from this play, this blend of history, drama, and those timeless human flaws?
You know, for me, it's a reminder that history is never black and white. It's about real people making real choices with real consequences. And those choices, those consequences, they still resonate with us today, don't they?
Absolutely. So there you have it. Henry VIII, a play full of political drama, religious upheaval, Tudor-era fashion.
And a healthy dose of betrayal and intrigue. Don't forget those cannons.
Definitely don't forget the cannons. But seriously, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We've given you a taste, but there's so much more to discover.
Read the play, see a performance, do your own deep dive. You won't regret it.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive. We'll see you next time when we'll explore another fascinating piece of history.